when I didn't ask you how to pronounce your last name.
Desjardins.
That's what I would say, since
Yeah,
I
good
did
job.
take French. Okay. Hello and welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. My guest today is Anne Desjardins. I see that high school French has paid off.
Yes, it has. Thank you. I appreciate that. A lot of people try to make me Spanish and call me Desjardins, but I think it really depends on the region of
Yes,
the country that I'm in when that occurs. So,
absolutely. We were just laughing before I hit record because Anne's lighting. So if you're not seeing this on the video, her lighting keeps getting good and then getting dark, and we were laughing about why is this happening? We can't tell. But if she keeps moving, maybe the lighting will stay good. Yeah, all these things that happen before that listeners don't get to hear or see. It's all
I
fun.
know. Yes.
All right. Well, let's dive in and let me ask you, what were the values and beliefs that you in incorporated or that you learned that became part of who you are when you were growing up?
Man, that's a really good question. I have to say, when I was younger, my parents are more on the conservative side. I went to Catholic school, so I was really taught more along the lines of the golden rule. I can still remember that inside the vitamin cabinet: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And a lot of things that my parents taught me were more business related. They did a lot of business ventures. And so I was constantly listening to the things they were listening to, different business speakers on tape back in cassette days.
Mm-hmm.
We had lots and lots of tapes everywhere that they were always listening and trying to put a different perspective on business and learn those things. And so I laugh sometimes now. I'm like, well, I see how I I was raised, right? It's like more conservative, more religious based, and more business based. And so I'm grateful for the skills that it has taught me. And, you know, I find that I was very fortunate to grow up in a safe home. I had both parents available. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, so there was always somebody there for me when I got home from school. And, we really just did our best to I think, instill me with things about loving others, being kind to others, having empathy. Um, I mean, not all things were positive, I'm sure, but those are the more driving factors that I can remember of some of the values and ethics that were instilled in me when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. And how did you incorporate those into your life as you grew into an adult and started your own career?
Um, Again, I find myself always kind of flashing back to those things, or Dale Carnegie or whoever else that they were, like, yep, already those seeds are planted in my brain. And what I do now, I'm full-time sales rep for a folding carton company, which I really enjoy a lot. So we make product out of trash and recycle that and put it back out into the economy as usable food grade safe products. And like, that's, I guess, something else probably that I was taught about, was just like recycling and taking care of the environment and doing good and having sustainable practices. And so that has lent well in, my quest as an adult. And my dad is a retired ER physician. And so I think also that was part of what I was exposed to, was caring for people, taking care of people, fixing their health. Both my grandfathers were doctors. I've got two uncles. I've got a cousin. It's a very prominent thing. And so part of what I do, I'm very business focused. And when I first went to college, I went to McGill University in Montreal, and I wanted to go into international business. Things were a little bit bumpy for me my first year, and I chose not to go back for my schooling there. I took some time off. It just wasn't the right time for me to go to school. And when I eventually came back to college, I worked in restaurants for a while as a manager for restaurants, and I went back to school, and I had a hard time picking really what I wanted to do. But I love people. And so I kind of focused on communications, global studies, American studies. And then now I left because what I do now is exactly international business. So it's kind of gone a very long, circuitous route to get me to where I originally thought I would wind up. And through that course of transformation there, I also had exposure to chronic illness, unfortunately, Lyme and tick-borne disease. And I don't know if any of the listeners are familiar with that saga, but man, it took me 7 years to get diagnosed. And so I can think about a lot of those stories from business people of like, just keep going, determination, drive, you can get yourself there, like you can have a plan. And so that actually landed very well for me on that angle. And then it took me another 7 years to fix myself. And then I started a support group for people with Lyme and tick-borne illness.
I want to get back to that in a second, but but you said something about when you were talking about your upbringing and about listening to all those business tapes and the business focused tapes. And then you said your dad and your grandfathers and your uncles were doctors.
Yeah.
And that's so unusual to me. I just wanted to pull that out because that doctors were listening to business tapes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, and I was a guest on a podcast fairly recently for a show that speaks to young physicians who are starting their own independent practices. And because in medical school, you learn how to practice medicine. You don't learn how to run a business. So yes. I found that very interesting. I wanted to mention that.
Yes. It is. I mean, and I mean, everything is a business, right? Everything.
Yes.
Restaurant, I'm in sales. Enrolling kids in college, I'm in sales. Like all of it, being a doctor, all of it ties back. You're ultimately selling yourself, right? And so those are very valuable skills for everyone to learn. And to your point, they don't really teach you that kind of thing in school.
Yeah.
Depending on what your specialty is. But like if you're going to be a doctor, again, a lot of that stuff kind of gets lost in translation. And so
yeah, it's interesting that you were exposed, first of all, to those concepts at such a young age, because a lot of people are not exposed to them. And secondly, that it came from somebody who wasn't a traditional business person.
Yes. Yes. So, although I will say to my parents' credit as well, that they had some side hustles going on too. And so that also came into play with those things. So,
yeah.
Very
very
it's
cool.
A good mix. And then I kind of like started to get off topic in a sense, but it was looping back, I promise. And that, I think some of those values that I was taught, again, to like help others or take care of others, or just seeing that model replicated. I pass out generally at the sight of blood and have a really hard time seeing people injured.
Yeah.
So I have I won't call it a genetic defect, but I deviate from the standard path in my family that way.
Right. But that doesn't mean you can't help people in other ways.
Well, that's right. But that's probably why I chose not to go to medical school. Like my dad encouraged me very much to go that direction. And I was like, Dad, I'm going to be the girl in class with a helmet on. No. He's like, you'll get over it. I'm like, I don't know about that. But after my experiences with chronic illness, Western medicine was there and performed sort of satisfactorily for me. But I was left with a lot of things to figure out and do on my own. And Lyme disease is a very complex illness, if you will, a disease, especially for people who it's gone long-term in their body. And there's really no one methodology of extracting it out of people's systems. And if you have co-infections and other things on board, it's just a big mess. And so something that helped me a lot was holistic healing and health. And yoga was one of the first things that I think I was introduced to more into that realm. And I really attribute a lot of why I'm still here to my yoga practice. But that opened me up to something called Ayurveda, which a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with in this country. But Ayurveda is the oldest holistic Indian medicine system. It dates back over 5,000 years. And in my opinion, if something has stayed through the course of time with that, many times it was just passed down verbally. It wasn't even written, but it has been written. I think when the British Empire took over in India, it kind of suppressed a lot of that and it kind of went underground. But it's making a resurgence again, which is great. But that has really helped me heal myself a lot. And so as an adult, I've got my business side, right? Like my sales job, I do that. I'm very good at that. I really love that. It's challenging. It's fun, constant change of pace. But I went back to school then to become an Ayurvedic practitioner. And I chuckle when I sign up for my classes. I was like, Dad, you're going to get your doctor kid yet.
Just in a different form.
That's right.
in a different
That's
way.
right.
Step back for a minute and talk about how, how your life was, because the show is fine is a 4-letter word and everything was fine until a certain point. And what happened, and like, what did, like, how take me through how this disease or condition evolved for you.
Sure. And I think this is a good lesson for a lot of people to understand. But I would say my 20s, I think the tick that got me sick was probably, I think I got bitten when I was 20. And through that decade, I had gone back to school. I was working 2 jobs. I was taking 5 to 6 classes a semester. I had a house that I owned, so I had household responsibilities, taking care of things. I unfortunately had a partner who was not a very good partner. He had a lot of toxic habits that really made living in that space more challenging. And it was a very unhealthy space for me to be in.
Mm-hmm.
But I was really too proud to admit to the fact that I had screwed up so bad in my life. And I didn't really open to tell people about it. And some of my girlfriends already kind of knew because I never complained about anything. And they were like, that's just not normal.
Right.
So I can remember when I was 30, I graduated college finally. And that person had got into another accident and probably should have gone to jail, but somehow magically did not. And it was going to cost us a lot of money to fix the challenges. And I really had enough and is at the end of my rope. And I made the decision to end that and get away from that space. But that was a very stressful, scary time for me to get away from this person.
I can imagine.
My parents wanted me to get a PFA. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Because you have to actually go to court and see the person and like do that. And
for
that
people who don't know, what is a PFA?
Protection from abuse.
Okay.
Yeah. So, my soul was very sick by then. And I can remember I went for a massage and the lady was like, your soul is dying. And I was like, how does she know? How does she know? And I feel like that was sort of a catalyst moment for me when I was like, I've got to change this. I can't do this for the rest of my life. I was with this person for 9 years, but God willing, the rest of my life would be a lot longer. And I just kept thinking about this being the rest of my life. And I was like, I can't do it. And I can understand where women get stuck there because it's terrifying to make that change and to make that leap. But I had faith and I just prayed to God a lot, and I had a lot of supportive friends, and I made it. But after that moment, it was almost like the death of someone, right? Like that was my best friend for a really long time. And so I was in a grieving process, and that's when symptoms started to come. And I just had crippling fatigue to the point where I could hardly get myself off the couch. My emotional spectrum was highly affected. Like I became very OCD, distrustful, a lot of compulsive behaviors. Like I would leave my house and come back and check the door, and then I'd leave again and come back and check to make sure. It's like just crazy things in a sense. I had memory problems. I couldn't remember. I couldn't have a conversation like this with you because I'd be like, what are we talking about? And I would just be like, okay, Lori, please say something so I can remember what I'm supposed to talk to you about.
Yeah.
People's names that I knew my entire life, I couldn't remember their names. I couldn't remember words for anything. I would stutter a lot. It took a lot of concentration to function. And I had some other random symptoms like night sweats and insomnia and hives. And I was going to doctors and they just kept telling me it was too much stress. And that was really what was driving everything, and that I was depressed. And I was like, listen, I'm getting depressed partially because of how I feel every day. It's not the other way around. Like there's legitimately something systemically wrong with my body. I don't know what it is. They told me I had narcolepsy at one point in time. I knew that wasn't accurate either, but they did put me on a stimulant, which was supposed to get rid of the fatigue. And I went back and he was like, what do you mean you're still tired? And I was like, made no dent. I mean, I could eat a whole bottle of caffeine pills and I'd be like, I'd be scared when I was driving because I'd be like falling asleep. But I was selling photocopiers at the time. I had to drive here, there, and everywhere for that job. And I can remember driving to Delaware more towards the end of my plight, and I thought I was scared to go. And I came back past the ocean, and I remember stopping. It was a private beach, and I can still hear the kid being like, "Mommy, who's that?" And I was like, "You just get away from me," because I thought it was going to be the last time I'd see the ocean. Maybe with hair on my head. I was pretty convinced at the end that I had a brain tumor. I lost coordination. I couldn't put a screw through a hole. I was trying to put a grill together. I would question, like, how do people have a family? How do they have kids? I was trying to sell my house because I couldn't even do my laundry. Like, I was just in a very bad space. And I told my parents, I was like, I love you a lot. But I'm pretty sure I have a brain tumor. I'm going to the doctor again tomorrow. I had given up on doctors after 4 years of them just telling me that it was stress. I was like,
Yeah,
okay,
of
well,
course.
and you kind of stop talking to people about it because doctors tell you there's nothing wrong with you. So then you feel like something's wrong with you.
Right. Like, am I going crazy? Is this all in my head?
That's right. And like, I didn't tell people about it. And
were your friends noticing things? People at work?
I think I kept a pretty good game face on, although like I cried a lot at work, and I think back to this moment. So I'm like, my poor coworkers, they just assumed I was like that. And I can remember having some conversations with some people, but again, I was like too afraid to really tell people. And I turned to alcohol. I started to drink a lot in that time space. And I mean, I can remember coming home from work, like I was working very long days then, but I took copious notes. That's how I really maintained things. And I would just come home and pick up the bottle of vodka, and I didn't even get a glass. I just put it right to my lips and drowned away in that. And that was the way I would sleep, because otherwise I couldn't sleep. And I'd get up and I would do it over the next day. And that was just a continuous cycle for a number of years. And I didn't really care for that behavior. I had a lot of anger. And I think that was Bartonella. They have something called Bart rage. It's a co-infection of tick-borne illness. And so, yeah, my whole being was just very different. I was a very different person, but I also became a hermit. And my friends didn't really see me anymore because I couldn't go anywhere. I can remember one Christmas, my friend came home from California and he wanted to hang out. And I just sat there and sobbed because I felt like a bad person. I felt like a bad friend because I couldn't make enough energy to even go to see that person. Like, but that really wasn't, the problem. And so when I started to get very dizzy, and I was concerned that I was going to crash and kill someone else's family member. And that's really, I think, the impetus that forced me to go back to seeing a doctor. And when I told that, I had heart fluttering problems, man, that was a hot mess.
Well, it's a lot. I mean, it manifests in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And for me, it was a very gradual decline into the pits of hell, right? Like, it wasn't an overnight poof. Some people get instantly sick, like very drastically, and they go to the hospital and they get pumped full of antibiotics and they catch it fast and off they go. But for me, it was like just very slowly things were changing and manifesting differently inside my being. And stress is a huge component of that. And I look at that period of my life, and after I ended that toxic relationship, I couldn't really count on that person financially, but he did contribute something. And so then I was pretty much left on my own, and I really struggled a lot. I mean, again, I was working 2 jobs to make ends meet, and I would lay in bed at night thinking about hoping they weren't coming to repo my car. It was a very tough, tight space to be in, and it just fueled that fire more.
Right. And so going to this last doctor, is that when they discovered?
Man, that lady, like, I was like, listen, I'm pretty sure I have a brain tumor. I've been tested for everything else known to man. They keep telling me there's nothing wrong with me, but these are all of my symptoms. And I think that's also another important thing for people to keep in mind. If you're having unanswered health challenges, make sure that you tell whomever you're talking to about all of the problems. I mean, I thought I was pretty vocal, but like, I can remember different periods of time. Like, my dental hygienist noticed the plaque on my teeth changed, and she was like, "What's going on with you?" And I just burst into tears because I was like, oh my God, it's a medical person who actually can tell that there's legitimately something happened to me, but she didn't know what was happening to me. She just could tell.
Yeah, she just saw the symptom. And I would imagine keeping a list, because
Yeah.
how do you, like, you are already having memory issues. So how do you
Right.
remember all of the
That's right.
things?
That's right.
But right. So keeping a list would be important as well.
That's right. And that's like your best advocate. You know, with Lyme and tick-borne illness, there's over 100 different symptoms. And a lot of times people get misdiagnosed with things and it inflames the brain. So they weren't too far off when they gave me the narcolepsy diagnosis, actually, because your brain will mimic that shape and pattern. It's typically a smooth surface. But when you have inflammation in there from infection, you think about any other part of our body. When we have an infection, it gets red and puffy and inflamed and angry, right? Once this sickness crosses the blood-brain barrier, that's what happens to our brain. It swells, it's angry, it's infected, and it's usually more of like a scalloped edge to it. Like you can see it visually. So they could see that something wasn't right there. But again, just still not quite the right diagnosis. But this lady, I laid it all out for her. She gave me an EKG. She said, okay, your heart seems okay. You know, but I think this is what's happening with you. And you'd probably be my 7th person that I diagnosed this week with Lyme. And it was a Wednesday. I'm like, okay. So I got my blood work done right away. I got my results back. I think it was actually that Friday, because I remember I was traveling with my family. So I can remember this time very well. Plus also it was the moment where I was like, oh my God,
I'm not crazy.
I go, there is legitimately something wrong with you.
Right. What kind of doctor was she?
Well, that's also another interesting thing. By then I had been exhausted with Western medicine and I went on Facebook and I was like, hey, does anybody have a more Eastern minded physician that you can recommend me to? Because I don't think I'm getting anywhere with these Western people. And they recommended a doctor. She's I think a DO. And my dad, interestingly enough, had been her mentor in the ER when she was training to become a physician, which I just think was like, what a small world. And also that practice, when I used to waitress, I waitressed at a fine dining restaurant not too far from this facility. And one of the physicians that owned that had been in at a dinner party. And it was probably 10 years before I went there for help, but I won't ever forget it. She was telling her guests, and I try not to eavesdrop, but sometimes you hear things.
Of course.
She was like, oh yeah, I found a tick crawling on me. I put myself on antibiotics just as cautionary measures. And that stuck with me.
Wow.
So like that, she was in tune with it. Some doctors just aren't educated, and I think enough to really understand this sickness. You want to go to a specialist or somebody who has experience with it or really can understand how it can morph in the body. But so she knew me. And so when they saw me, like, I think they legitimately knew that I wasn't just some fly by night person complaining about something, that like legitimately there was something wrong. And so once I got diagnosed there, again, I was so thankful. I tell her all the time that they saved my life. Like they really did save my life. I was very close to ending my life. I didn't want to be alive any longer.
It's okay.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I usually do good with that part, but it's like when I just think about the magnitude of the situation for people and how much it really impacted my life, it's like, man, things were not fine. Things were not fine at all. And I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful that I got help when I did. And they put me on antibiotics, I think for 5 weeks. And I felt like a human again, because what I consider is it put me into zombie land. Like I was a zombie. I was a shell of a human. The lights were on, but nobody was home any longer. I was lucky to just breathe through my day, let alone have energy to eat or do anything like that.
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like, is zombie.
It truly. And I have a podcast now called The Silver Lyming to help spread awareness and stories of hope of people recovering. But it's amazing to me how many other people have that same terminology for it, and that we've never even spoken before, but we're likening it to the exact same state of being. And I just remember feeling alive again, and I was so excited, and I could talk to people again and have a conversation that flowed, and I wasn't sitting there waiting for them to talk back so I could pick up where I left off, kind of a thing. And I was out to dinner maybe in about the 3rd week of that, and I started to slip again. And I could feel the symptoms kind of coming back. And I was like, oh, no. no, no, no. And we were coming up to the holiday season, and I was really excited to have a normal holiday where I felt well and I could be with my family. And so I called them and I was like, listen, my antibiotics are going to be out soon, but I'm not ready to come off of them. Can you please give me some more? Like, they had helped, and now I'm feeling funny again, but I think just I need longer term with that. And in actuality, to effectively eradicate Lyme, the same that we would strep, you take antibiotics for 10 days for a strep, you need to be on it for like 11 weeks. It's just a slower bacterial replication cycle. It's not even a bacteria, it's a spirochete, corkscrew shaped organism. So it's a little bit different. But at any rate, they redid my blood work. And the first time I had tested positive, and this is also something to note for people, in that the longer you go with it in your body, the more likely you are to have an accurate test. The initial diagnostic testing for Lyme is terrible. It's a 2-tiered system that we call Western blot and ELISA, but at best it's 65% accurate, and there's a litany of reasons why. But when I heard that, I was like, well, at least there's one positive to having gone for that long. At least I got a good test, and they actually knew what was happening to me. But the second time when I took it, it was equivocal, which I didn't quite understand, but I was like, oh, good. That's not positive. So it's kind of in the middle, and it's not negative, but I must be going in the right direction. So I was encouraged by that. I think probably I was a little bit misguided in that thought path, but they did give me an additional 3 weeks of antibiotics, which I finished. And when I was done with that, I definitely felt better than I did before. And then I think that Memorial Day, I saw a bullseye on my leg, and I was like, no, there's no way I had a tick on me, because I'm like tripped out. I'm constantly PTSD. Yeah, we'll work on that sometime. Work in progress. But like, I was like, there's no way I would have missed that. There's no way. And so I'm pretty sure it was a mosquito, which also, please note that those things unfortunately can transmit Lyme as well. Really, almost any biting insect can.
I didn't even know that.
I sent a picture to her and my doctor, and she was like, oh, let's just give you some antibiotics to be on the safe side. And so I had taken another round. I think she might have given me 30 days cycle. Okay. And when I came off of it that time, I really didn't feel right at all. And, but my brain was working a little bit better, and being wired the way that I am, with empathy and wanting to help other people, I felt it was very important. I was very compelled to talk to people. And so I started these things called quick tick tips on Facebook to just teach people a quick tip every day about these things. And when I started to watch those, I was like, oh my God, I have Bell's palsy. Like, this has gone on way too far now. Like, it wasn't, I think a lot of people maybe typically think of it as like your whole face was like, it is very subtle. But when you put your makeup on or you're looking in the mirror, generally you're not talking.
Right.
So looked okay.
Yeah.
Although I can remember asking people if my face looked like it was melting off at some points in time, because I had always this very strange sensation on that side of my face. But then I saw it and I was like, no. I'm a little bit more on the vein side. I'm okay with that. Hey. But I was like, no, I am not willing to sacrifice my face now. And in the state of Pennsylvania, long-term Lyme care is not covered by insurance. And Lyme specialists are very expensive, unfortunately. So I found a lady. I had joined an organization called the PA Lyme Resource Network. So I run a chapter for them here in Berks County, Pennsylvania. And I was grateful for that exposure. I did it partially selfishly just so that I could understand more about this and figure out how to fix myself. But I went to a conference they had, and I met an ILADS trained physician there. ILADS is International Lyme and Associated Disease Society. And I went to start seeing her. $550 an hour. That was a discount, in my opinion. A lot of the doctors were $1,200 or more an hour. Then you have testing. Then you have supplements. Then you have antibiotics. You've got all this stuff that you've got to figure out how to pay for, and talk about adding stress to my life.
Right.
And I really didn't share with people the burden that I have a hard time sometimes doing that, asking for help or letting people know.
I'm noticing that in your story.
Yeah. I like to take it all on by myself. I don't know why.
Nobody needs to help me.
Yeah. So, I would go to those appointments by myself, and I would just leave sobbing, because I was like, trying to figure out how I was paying for things. And it put me into a big pile of debt, which is something that I had a lot of embarrassment and shame over. And like, I wouldn't even allow myself to consider dating in a sense, because I was like, there's no way that I'm going to share this burden. And the decade of my 20s, when I was with that wonderful human, that also left me with a lot of debt.
Sure.
And these were all just driving factors through my journey, but I was committed to the fact that I was going to get better, that I was going to regain my health. Like, I never saw the option of not getting better as a choice.
Right.
Like,
once you were introduced to the possibility that you could get better, that you would get better, then you were hanging on to that, like, I'm not letting go.
Yeah. And I think something for people who are maybe going through this is like, support groups are nice and good, and we can share stories with each other, but they can also be very dark and isolating, and leaving you with no hope, because all these people are just very sick in them, and they're just talking and kind of feeding themselves more into sickness, right?
I can see that. Right. When you're hanging out with other sick people, it's like anything. The people that you hang out with are who you become. Right. So if you're hanging out with sick people, you're going to stay sick. If you're hanging out with people who are not successful, you're going to stay unsuccessful. I get it.
That's right. And so I kind of made the choice, and it's, again, partially how I'm wired, more of an independent soul, but I just kind of stuck to myself, and I just was committed to going to those appointments and doing what she told me, and doing a lot of research and figuring out different ways. And I basically completely became a new person. I don't drink alcohol anymore. I don't drink caffeine. I really avoid sugar. I don't have gluten or dairy for the most part. I got really into hot yoga. I learned about different energy ways to heal the body. I'm also certified with Reiki. I became a chirologist. That's a palm reader.
Okay.
But it's not like, oh, Lori, I'm going to tell you you're going to have 3 kids and this is when you're going to die. Like, It's not anything like that. There's actually 14 times more connections from our cerebral cortex to our hands than any other part of our body. And our hands are a great map of how we relate and feel about the world and ourself. And so I can really see a lot of information about people. And the reason that I got trained in it was because when I was recovering, it was something that I used to help myself, but it was so many aha moments in acceptance of self that I was like, I've really got to learn how to do this for other people, because it gave me a sense of freedom in my own skin. And I think maybe that's really what this journey was, partially for me to learn, was listening to myself, honoring myself, speaking up for myself. And I became, obviously through this process, like my own best advocate, but really understanding the implication of spiritual health in conjunction with physical health. And it kind of goes back to the beginning of when we started this, is that, I think people really need to understand that correlation a lot better. It's not just body, it's not just mind, it's just not just spirit. They're all intrinsically connected, which is why I like Ayurveda, because it really looks at people from all sides. You're looking at the whole human, not just a set of symptoms or a subset of what's going on with them. It's like the entire being. And through a lot of meditation, that's another thing that really has helped me, visualization, understanding how these things work. And I chuckle. I'm like, these are all principles that I learned when I was little. I sort of got knocked off through different,
as many of us have. Yeah.
That's right. And in Ayurveda, we say we're born, we have our prakriti, which is our natural state of being. And through life, we have our vikruti, which is an imbalance then of our being. And so how do we get yourself back into more of your prakriti state, your more initial state of being? And I just am grateful now for my experience, even though it was very harrowing and hard in the middle. And again, almost many times that I was going to tap out and just say, I'm not doing this anymore. But it's shaped me into a much greater woman, a much greater person, that I have so much more to give back to people. And I'm just very thankful in the end, again, for that experience and for all of the things that I've been taught and learned in my life. But I think also maybe part of it was like taking off the mask of some of those things that I was taught that didn't fit me
Mm-hmm.
and didn't serve me, and figuring out how to redo me as me and
Yes.
who
Oh, I
I am.
love that, how you just phrased that. That was so good. I feel
Yeah.
like this whole conversation has been so many amazing takeaways.
Well,
And
thanks.
so thank you.
Yes.
Before I have two questions before we wrap things up. One is, this one's coming. Uh what's the song? I mean, when you were going through that, I don't know if you were listening to music to help you, but what is the song that you listen to now that when you need an extra boost of energy?
What's blazing in my head right now is "This Girl Is on Fire."
Oh, yeah.
This girl is on fire.
Which is
Sorry, I'm
funny
not
to
trying
me
to do
because
the
you were
justice.
explaining how your brain was inflamed. So is
Yeah, yeah. And the fire energy is the doer, the catalyst, like, let's get it done
Yeah.
energy. And my flame was extinguished a little bit through that period, right? Like
Yeah.
my flame was really low. And so had to figure out how to like get that fire back up burning bright and
Mhm.
making
Mhm.
like when our internal fire, our agni is burning bright, things burn off of us, right? Like toxins and poisons and illnesses and negative thoughts and all of these things burn off of us because we're just so bright. I'm getting goosebumps right now. Like
Yeah,
they
I
can't,
feel it. I feel this come from it. Yeah.
yeah, they can't stick to us. And so we've just got to figure out how to keep that fire burning bright within
Mhm.
us. And when things are starting to hamper it or darken it, it's like, I got to get that out. I've got to take a
Mm.
time out and listen to myself. And what do I actually really need? And I can remember singing that song actually when I got the job I have now, like 5.5 years ago. So this is one that stuck with me, but I sang that to the guy in the interview. I was still alive again because, it's maybe been 8 years now that I've,
Yeah.
since my diagnosis, and I was like coming back to life again. And it just
Mhm.
was something that was really coursing through my being. And just a quick thing, something's telling me to mention, but when I think about taking off masks and learning to be more comfortable in my own skin and having greater inner peace, I had a fantastic book I read called A Course in Miracles.
Oh,
I'm
yes.
not sure if you're familiar with that, but fabulous read. And I can't say I sat down and read it front to back. I actually took a step back and read a book in like preparation for reading it, like how to actually read this book because it's
Yeah,
a
it's a
really
lot.
thick one.
Mhm.
And I would just read a little bit every day in the morning before I would do my yoga practice and just, have that to marinate on. But that really helped me to take off these masks that I was given that really weren't mine to wear and to, again, find a better space of inner peace. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. I think when we have the best optimal health is when we're going to find ourselves in the best health inside with inner peace and quiet and acceptance of who we are and self-love and just being filled with that, again, that light
Yeah.
of life force energy.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Like I said, this has been such an amazing conversation. And if somebody wanted to continue the conversation with you, what is the best way for them to find you?
Well, I'm all over the place. I am sure of that. So you can look for me on Facebook, Instagram. I'm on TikTok, although probably not as regularly as the other two. And I have a website. It's thesilverlyming.com. So it's Lyming. It's a little bit of a pun on the silver lining and lime coming together. And, I always think about one of my favorite questions to ask people is like, what's the best thing that's happened to you as a result of getting Lyme and tick-borne illness?
Mm,
Because it's not all bad. And I
right.
wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be as successful as I am. I wouldn't have this resilience. I wouldn't have this drive and determination had I not. Well, maybe some of those things were there before, but like they lent well to getting through. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here now if these things hadn't happened to me. And so shifting more from a state of sadness or sickness or whatever, we got to shift into gratitude and abundance and
Right.
and just being thankful for what we have.
Yes, that higher energetic vibration. And
Yes.
I love that. Thank you so much. I'll put links to all of your socials and your website in the show notes
Awesome.
so
Thanks,
people,
Lori.
it's easy for people to find it. And thank you so much for joining me today on
For
Fine is a
sure.
four-letter word.
I appreciate the opportunity. This is a lot of fun for me. Thank you.